What's going on, everybody? It's ShamefulPenguin here, back with another video. Today we're going to be going over 5 builds I recommend to you guys for 3.13 League Start. Echoes of the Atlas will be offering a brand new endgame to Path of Exile, where we're going to be fighting multiple bosses at the same time, as well as having to survive all this mayhem that's happening on our screen at once. So survivability and boss damage is going to be a must for these builds. Top of that, Harvest, Heist, and this new Ritual League are all going to be in the game. So Harvest Crafting is back. Harvest Crafting is going to allow for tons of more builds to be in meta, and as well as just straight up usable as where they struggled before. So Harvest Crafting is going to allow these builds to strive, especially in my opinion bow builds. Bow builds are going to be king because crafting bows are a lot easier with this harvest mechanic. If you end up liking any of these builds, you can find all the information about each build down below in the description. You can find full build videos, build guides on the forums, or path of building links down below. So if you like any of them, go check that out. The first build I'm going to be recommending is the Toxic Rain Trickster. This build does crazy amount of DPS. It has a high ceiling for your gearing, and it's actually a build that you can play while leveling up as a league starter, and just play it all through the end game, where you can just have one build do all content. Toxic Rain is a skill. It's a bow skill that you shoot projectiles into the air and they land, creating spore pods. These spore pods explode and they can actually overlap onto enemies, dealing massive amount of damage. Toxic Rain is a really strong skill, so it's been used for many leagues before. There are other ascendancies you can use like Deadeye or Pathfinder, but I highly recommend using Trickster over these because Trickster offers a lot more survivability on top of adding a bit of damage. This build will be especially strong thanks to Harvest League coming back into the standard Path of Exile. Toxic Rain uses a bow, and the bow you would want previously is plus level to gems and chaos damage over time multiplier on your bow, as well as attack speed. Since we only cared about that due to it being a chaos gem, those rolls were kind of hard to get all at once, but thanks to Harvest Crafting, it's going to be a lot easier and a lot cheaper to get a endgame bow that will allow you to deal a massive amount of damage. Overall, Toxic Rain has a pretty good clear speed on top of great single target DPS. This build can be hard to survive with, but thanks to Trickster we have a lot of extra survivability, whereas we wouldn't with other ascendancies. This build is also, it can in the late game be very expensive to build, but there are cheaper variations of this build that you can just get off the ground and work really well until red tier maps. So I highly recommend this build as a league start, and I hope you guys enjoy this build. The second build I will be discussing is the Bow Gladiator, or as I like to call it, the Bleedsplosion Bow Gladiator. This build was made by me. I'm going to be recommending. This build is excellent at getting off the ground for league start, and it can just clear all content no problem. This variant of Bleed Bow uses Split Arrow and Puncture, where Split Arrow is used for mapping and the Puncture is used for single target DPS. Split Arrow has a lot of utility choices through Fork, Chain, and Pierce. My favorite option to use in the gameplay you're going to be seeing on the screen is me using Fork and Chain. Fork and Chain allow it so when you hit a big mob that there's tons of enemies, it pretty much will always hit every single enemy. There's so much wave clear potential. The fastest mapping links I believe are Fork and Chain, but if you're into hitting higher numbers and don't really care as much about hitting the like clearing at maximum speed, and you want to just see the most DPS, or you're fighting a map that you're struggling with, then maybe try out using Pierce. Pierce support adds a little bit of damage, but also you wouldn't be using 2 gems as a utility slot, so you could use something like Pierce and then Deadly Ailments, or something that gem you're not using before. So I highly recommend just tinkering with what you're using. Split Arrow is a very fun skill, and it's really good with bleed interaction, so I highly recommend trying it out. On the other hand, Puncture is going to be our single target DPS. Puncture allows us to do far more damage due to its higher base damage, so higher bleed, but at the same time only fires 1 arrow. So anything that's a boss or doesn't die immediately, you're going to want to just hit it with puncture. So now you have 2 options for puncture. Either you can have it on a 6-link, like your split arrow, 1 on your body armor, 1 on your bow, or you can actually put puncture on the Asylum helmet. The Asylum helmet gives you the snipe skill, so you hold down the puncture skill for a few seconds and you release it, so basically you're charging that arrow, and if you land that arrow, it's going to do a crazy amount of bleed damage to that enemy, and I highly recommend using this if you have the budget. Asylum will add the most single target DPS, but at the same time you're going to have to stand still for about a second or 2 to make sure you charge up that arrow so you're getting that bonus damage. Overall, the Bow Gladiator has really good clear speed, has really good boss DPS and survivability, but can be more expensive thanks to the Asylum helmet and the fact that getting the bleed mod on your bow can be pretty difficult. Thanks to harvest crafting, this will be easier than previous leagues, but overall it is a bit harder to gear for this build, but once you get it, you're going to be doing tons more DPS. The third build I'm going to be talking about today is the Blade Blast Blade Fall builds. These builds have been really popular the past 2 or 3 leagues, and I believe it's going to be incredibly popular this league. It's popular because it's really good for racing, getting out of maps, and doing early maps with little gear, as well as doing later maps with minimal effort. This build can fare and do pretty much all content with a low budget, so it's really strong for league start. There's also a few variants of this build that I'm going to be linking down below. There's a physical like crit variant, a fire-based Chieftain variant, and a poison assassin variant, and I recommend looking at which type of variant you want to play. I think my favorite variant is the poison variant because you can use Plague Bearer to increase your clear speed overall, but any of these builds you're going to choose are going to be excellent at league start, so don't worry about that. The way Blade Blast and Blade Fall work together, Blade Fall drops an insane amount of blades from the sky, and Blade Blast just has them all explode at once, overlapping damage and doing great boss DPS. So there's a little bit of a technique to use. When you're using Blade Fall, you want to use Blade Blast before the end of duration of Blade Fall, because there's more blades that spawn than they're allowed to in the game, so some of them are going to despawn by the end of Blade Fall, so you can stack the damage and have that chain explosion happen more and longer if you fine tune it a little bit, and you'll get the hang of it once you play this build a little bit. So this build is going to be really good at early clear speed. It's going to do some good boss DPS, and the builds I'm recommending also have really good survivability, so a lot higher than normal. A lot of these life pools are higher, up to like 7 or 8k if you can push it a little bit, and it relatively has really low budget thanks to the minimal amount of uniques recommended for this build. The fourth build I'll be recommending is the Carrion Golem build. Carrion Golems have gotten a bit of a nerf, as well as Necromancer ascendancy quite a little bit, but Carrion Golems have done so much boss DPS in the past and so much just damage overall that it's not going to kill this build, and it's still going to be probably one of the highest DPS in the game, and I highly recommend that you try it out if you haven't, because it's a really fun build. I've made a variant on this build that is an endgame variant. It's not really league start friendly, so I don't recommend using my build for this. I am linking down Grimro's video down below. He made a showcase of the all of the nerfs that the build got, and still was able to clear the bosses just as fast, it seemed like. He actually has like league start friendly tips and all that stuff in his video, and I highly recommend that you try it out if you're interested in trying the Carrion Golem build. He's using Necromancer. You can also go Elementalist and use the Golemancers as well. That is a good fine option for this build, but I enjoy using the Necromancer ascendancy. Carrion Golems overall are known for having some of the highest single target DPS builds in this game, and there's a reason for it, because they just naturally have more damage, and it's easier to get damage from minions. There's a ton of opportunities to min-max on this build. There's tons of opportunities to try out your own things on this build. There's a lot of expensive items, so this makes this build a little more difficult to reach the max of. But if you're into having builds as a project and almost never being able to complete it due to how expensive it can be, or always searching for that new item, this build is going to be for you, because you can do so much with Carrion Golems. Overall, this build has a decent clear speed, amazing boss DPS, good survivability due to you not having to attack things so you can focus on dodging, on top of a small budget if you're going for a low budget, but it can be one of the more expensive builds. Due to its high volume of players, items might be more expensive just due to how popular the item is that you're going to want as well. So this build can be a little more expensive than others, but it's still League Start friendly, solo self-found friendly. There's a lot of options, a lot of things you can take out of the build, and especially follow build guides that are lower budget if that's your budget. Last but not least, I'm going to be talking about the Cold Snap Vortex Occultist. This build is a classic. This build's been around for a long time, and this build is actually really fun. I did play this during Flashback as my kind of a racing build. I tried to just go fast and zoom through all content on solo self-found hardcore, and this build ended up being really good for me. With zero practice of solo self-found hardcore, I got to Act 10 and died because of, I don't know, not paying attention halfway. It was like 2 a.m. But this build is crazy good. I am recommending Ghazzy's build because it's an old build video, but it still works. Pretty much nothing's changed on it since then, so I wouldn't worry about it being an old video. There's really no changes. There's been other builds that are more updated, but I didn't like them as much as Ghazzy's, so I still recommended his. This build primarily uses the skill Vortex. Vortex drops a vortex around you, and it does damage over time when they step in it, a good amount. Cold Snap is also a skill that's doing damage, but with the guide I'm recommending, it's not on, Cold Snap's not on a 6-link, only Vortex is. Cold Snap's on a 4-link, offering you more support damage. It's giving a little bit of exposure, frenzy charges, damage, bone chill. It's giving a lot of bonus effects, so Vortex can do even more damage. Also, the fact of using Vol, Cold Snap is really good for clearing maps. If you have a lot of damage, you can just slap on Cold Vortex and walk around with your huge AoE, just one-shotting mobs, walking through them. It's very fun build, really smooth leveling. It's unfortunate that you don't get Vortex or till later in the game. I think it's Act 3 or 4, but you do just level with Freezing Pulse and Stormbrand, other things like that, whatever you want to level with. But once you do get Vortex, you're just walking through the game, clearing all content, and it's so much fun. So I highly recommend using this build for League Start. It's more fun. You can get some cool MTXs on it too. But yeah, this build overall, I would have to say, has really good clearing. Not like the best in the game, but it's still up there because you're just pretty much walking through content, not really stopping. For its boss DPS, it is probably the lowest boss DPS that I'm recommending, and that hurts a little bit for this league thanks to the end game most likely having to rely a lot on boss DPS. We don't know how much boss DPS you're going to need yet, since the patch isn't live as of making this video, but it will be lacking more than the other builds, but it will still have a good amount of boss DPS. It's not going to be lacking at all. I think it can do the content no problem. It just won't be as fast as the other builds. As for survivability, it's going to be really strong. A lot of endgame builds for this Vortex Cold Snap build are usually either CI or they're going low life by the end of the league or once they get some currency, which is a great idea because Occultist stacks with energy shield. So you can do that, but you don't have to until late. So this build is fairly cheap. It can be very expensive trying to get a shavs or whatever you're trying to get to go low life, but before that, like, requires 0 gear and you can do all content no problem on a life based build for this. So I highly recommend that as my last build. That's it for the 5 builds I had for you guys. I have seen all these builds do Awakener 8 before, so all these builds are going to be most likely really good at the new endgame content for you guys. I hope you found a build you enjoyed out of this list. Let me know what build you think you're going with in this new 3.13 league. And I hope to see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.